Jim, this is first and foremost, this is a real pleasure and an honor for me to be here to interview you for this.
We worked together, didn't we?
We have worked together, and it is, you know, I've only been in town 30 years, so I'm still a newcomer.
It seems like you were just here.
Seems like I just arrived, but been here about 30, and in all that time, you've been a fixture, and the Williams family has been a fixture, and it's an absolute pleasure and honor for
and
me
you
to
had
be
to
here.
ride by this place all the time.
Yeah.
And smell the manure.
Jim, as I said, you've the Williams name is long-standing in Sunderland. It dates back to the very beginning of the town's history. Tell us a bit about the history of your family in Sunderland and some of the notables from the Williams clan.
The Williamses moved up here as in the early, or around 1775, a little before then, and Oliver was the one that moved up here, and he didn't have a place to live, but he was here a little while. Then he bought the farm and started building more buildings, and from then on he was very active in the town. After that, you want to know the other generations that came right after him? Oliver Jr. was the next in line, and he wasn't quite the person that his father was, and he got to drinking quite a bit. And his son came along, Franklin, and Franklin didn't like the fact that Oliver was drinking quite a bit, and he wanted to take over the farm, and finally Franklin took over the farm from his father. And his father ran a little bar, I think, in the downstairs, and they took in people that drove by in stagecoaches as boarders, and had a little bar room downstairs. When we took the house down, we discovered the places where the bar room was. So that was his start, and Franklin became very successful after his trip down south, and took over the farm and ran a good operation. He raised cattle and vegetables. He peddled vegetables as far north as Millis Falls and Greenfield by horse and buggy.
Now, Franklin's story is actually included in a diary that's in the library. Is that right?
Yes, it is, and we had to go over the diary carefully because some of his writings weren't exact. I mean, his spelling wasn't that good. My uncle did that, and my uncle was the one that took a hold of the diary and had it written in the press. So he invested in property and so forth. But when he was working on the barn, he was putting up a track for the hay, taking the hay up in the hayloft with a carpenter, and they had a staging there. The staging broke, and the both of them fell down, and he broke his neck and died 5 or 6 hours later.
Oh my gosh.
So that was the end of Franklin. And his father, his son, Frank Oliver, took over. He had been working for the state at that time, and he'd gone to UMass, or Mass Aggie, I should say. So Frank Oliver took over and ran the farm. He had 3 sons, and 2 of the sons went to Mass Aggie thinking they might be farmers, but they didn't want to be farmers, and my father went to Wesleyan, and he became the farmer.
That is funny.
Yeah. My father was doing quite well in school, so they felt that he should be going to some other school. He went to Cushing Academy first. So my father worked with my grandfather on the farm, and until my grandfather got sick and died, and when I was, I have to go back a little bit. I was in the service when my grandfather became ill. When I came home, he was still working, but he shouldn't have been, and he died shortly after I got home. So I went to work the day after I got home. My grandfather said, "You've got to help us with the tobacco." So he thought I was a little late getting to work the next day after I got home from the service. So I got along with my grandfather quite well. He didn't bother me because I like to work too. So my grandfather didn't live long after that, and my father took over. And then my father got sick, and he died 9 months later. And my brother and I, my younger brother and I, took over the farm and started the operation. And my father was the one that got us interested in putting in a milking parlor system for milking cows. It was probably the only, we had the only system that was in this whole area, or this part of the country.
Wow.
He saw the article in one of the farm magazines and was interested in it. So he was really the brains that got it started, and he didn't live to see it go. But anyway, we got the parlor going, and it was working out quite well, and had a lot of people come in to look at it because it was pretty unique. And my brother and I stayed together for until my brother left in 1956, I think it was. And it was just my wife and I that took over the farm and kept us pretty busy.
You've got so much history of the Williams family. Have you been the historian, the one who's done that research, or you mentioned your uncle who helped write who helped edit the diary of?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know who it would be, but my uncle was one that got going on this diary that.
Yeah.
And put a lot of the genealogy into it. And my wife helped him. It was a little difficult reading my Franklin's diary because it wasn't, the spelling wasn't always very good, and sometimes you didn't know what the words meant.
Yeah.
But my uncle worked with my wife on it, and got that through, but we don't have any official.
No official historian
No.
for the family. Well, you sure do have a lot of stories about things that happened among the family. You're sitting here today in your great-grandfather's chair, and so both the artifacts of the family and the history of the family have really reside with you, and you nurture those well.
Yes.
Jim, your family, generations of your family continue to stay in town. You've got a grandson or a great-grandson building a house right across the street. It seems like the Williams plan to be here for another few generations.
I think they like the town, and they like the farm. That's something that's really makes us feel very good, because my daughter also lives here, and she works in the library. It's a great town.
Yeah.
And I think people are really attached, our family's attached to the town.
Yeah.
So I think the reason is that we live in a great place.
Well, it is interesting. You've got one of your children that is running the farm, one who is a carpenter in town, and one who works at the library. They really have stayed right here,
Yeah.
all for very different reasons, but or doing different things. But the appreciation for the community is obviously very strong in each of them.
Yeah, they love the town.
I understand that the original family homestead was lost in the 50s, but that you still have large crowds that show up every year for the annual family reunion that takes place on the farm. We saw a picture a little while ago of a gigantic crowd of people in front of the porch out here. How many people come for those annual family gatherings? And
Usually around 80 or 85.
Amazing.
And it's still growing. The kids still coming along. The numbers are going to be up to 100 shortly.
And it's lovely to see. I know I've driven by on a number of occasions and see all the cars and all the gathering and games going on in the side yard, and it's got to be a wonderful family tradition.
It is, and they love the animals for one thing, and they like the area because they can play in the tennis court, and they can play in the outside here. They have a volleyball game going all the time. Horseshoes was another thing. I used to be pretty good at that myself, but I can't throw them anymore. But everybody likes to play horseshoes, and so there's a lot of things going.
Yeah.
And they have so much enthusiasm. It's makes you feel very good that they have a place to go, and it's their home.
Yeah. Well, it must make you very proud to see that gathering and have them come here to your home and your farm and be able to share that with such a large extended family.
Yeah.
That's got to be a highlight of your year every year.
We have to use name tags now. We can't keep track of them all.
Oh, that is funny. So we talked a bit, Jim, about the town and sort of the character that it has now, how it's so important to your children. You've grown up in this community for all of your years. You must have some very rich memories of this town and how it's changed and evolved over your lifetime. Any noteworthy stories that you would share from growing up in Sunderland, whether it was elementary school or Boy Scouts or any of the other things that occurred here in Sunderland?
You know, it's been very interesting, and the people I grew up with were so interesting. All sorts of nationalities. When I was born in 1923, there were a lot of people born in 1923. Right on this street, I think there were 10 people born in 1923. That was after the war.
Yeah.
World War I. So we played together. They were Polish, Russian, Lithuanians, all sorts of them. And we had a lot of fun playing. And some of them were hard up. They didn't have good jobs, and times were tough for them. I never heard anybody complaining, and they all worked. We had people working on the farm here for nothing because he couldn't hire anybody. And we played soccer, we played volleyball. I think that wasn't very soon after, but soccer was a big thing. And the girls and the boys played soccer. And there were some very attractive girls up here. And the Cebulskis were one of the names that I remember so well. There were three girls, and they were good athletes, and some more girls that were outstanding. And they used to come down here at night after we got through supper, and we played steal the flag and kick the can and hide and seek and all those sort of things. And I could hear the mothers calling for them to come home. And it was just a place where people came to.
Yeah.
And I hear from some of those people still.
Oh, that's
'cause
wonderful.
some of them are gone.
That was a time when children were free-range children.
That's
We
right.
talk about free-range chickens now.
Yeah.
That was when there was free-range children, and
Yeah.
they'd be out wandering throughout the community until it got dark, and then everybody'd come home.
That's
there was a very different lifestyle, raising kids at in the late 1920s and 1930s compared to. Here we are 80 years later or 75
We
years
really
later.
had the best time
Yeah,
because that's the way things were. And we used to go down and play ball a little later on when we got older,
yeah.
down behind the school down there. That was so good to remember. And all the people that I heard from a lot of those people that moved away from here, some in California, and most of them are gone now, but some of them have come back here, and we've had a pretty exciting get-together.
Yeah.
Columbus was one of the names, and they had a family whose father left the family after the last child was born. And the mother died soon after that. So the oldest one in the family, there were two girls that were the oldest, took over the family. And we grew up with those people, and they never complained about anything. They worked and they had fun.
Yeah.
And one of the oldest ones just died recently. She was well in her 90s. She lived in Connecticut. We used to go down and visit her. So they learned to do with what they could do, and,
Yeah.
and they stayed together. The family stayed together. Some people wanted to split the family up. I think there were 8 people in the family.
Wow.
One of them ran away, the oldest one.
Wow. Now you must have seen some remarkable events during your time here, and I think particularly of the 36 and 38 floods and hurricanes and the bridge washing away, and you would have been about a teen at that that time.
I think I was 13.
Yeah.
I have a tape of that, the 36 flood. They did a tape. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen that.
I've got one right here. I'm in it. But it was a very exciting time.
I bet it was. And frightening too.
Yes, it was. We were keeping track of it. I was keeping track of the water coming up, and it was coming up at a very rapid rate. And ice was coming down the river, banging up against the trees. And I saw the Montego City bridge, the covered bridge, float by. And it hit our bridge. And our bridge caved in. And everybody was saying that you've got to get out of town because the Vernon Dam may cave in. And if the Vernon Dam caved in, it would knock out the Turners Falls Dam, and we'd have a tidal wave coming down here.
Wow.
So Charlie Hoxie got on the back of a make-up fire wagon, and he was hollering to everybody up and down the street to leave town. That's what the orders were from the police. But we had to get the cows out because we didn't know whether the cows would be flooded. And we drove them up on the hill, and it was pitch dark with no lights. It was about midnight. So we had lanterns in the front and kerosene lanterns and kerosene lanterns in the back. We drove them up, and the cows are very good, and we got them into a pasture up on the hill, and came back, and 8 of us piled into a Ford car, and quite a small one, and left town for Amherst, and stayed in the basketball stadium down there, the cage they called it. And next day we came up to milk the cows. We had to tie them to the fence, and we got some cans to put the milk in, and we put the cans in the water because the water was ice cold, and preserved the milk. I don't know how we got the milk out of town.
Out of town. Wow.
It was pretty exciting.
I guess that would be pretty exciting in a and then you had another flood just 2 years later.
We had a hurricane 2
yeah.
years later.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
That, we were fortunate we didn't lose any tobacco barns, but we knocked one of them off the piers. We had to set it back. But we didn't lose much from that. But most everybody lost tobacco barns.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Jim, I understand you served in the military and had some notable experiences there. Do you want to talk about some of your recollections from your time in the military?
Yes. I joined the Marine Corps at the University of New Hampshire my second year. And after I got through my second year, a bunch of us from the University of New Hampshire got on a train and ended up at Cornell, and we didn't know what it was all about. But what they were doing was they were keeping us in college so they could send us through officers training, because the Marine Corps was going to expand by 500,000 so they could invade Japan. We found out this later. We didn't want to go to school, but we did, and we decided, well, maybe we flunk out. and my marks weren't very good, but they jacked them up enough so I stayed in, but we lost a few of them, quite a few of them. And I can remember them walking down the road to the railroad station, and some of them ended up on Iwo Jima. But we wanted to be like everybody else. We wanted to fight somewhere. So I stayed there for 3 semesters because they didn't have enough room through officers training at Quantico to take us all. So after 3 semesters there, we went down to Parris Island, then we went to Quantico officers training, and I ended up with a group of veterans that were back from Guadalcanal, and they were going through officers training at the same time that some of us were going through officers training. So I got my commission there, but while I was there, we were called to attend Roosevelt's funeral to march in Washington, D.C., and then go up to Hyde Park, where the president was going to be buried.
Wow.
So that's what we did. We went up there. We had to shave in restrooms and stuff because we didn't have time to shave in Washington. And we were lined up along the road where the family and the casket was coming. And we had to come to parade arms when the car went by us. And it was a very narrow road. You could reach out and touch the car that went by us. We saw the family in the car, all the sons, and it was a big car. And there were people from all over the world. It was quite an experience.
Now, did you tell me that was the first funeral that you had ever been to?
That was my first funeral.
The president's, Franklin D.
I
Roosevelt.
hadn't voted for him. I voted for Dewey.
I bet he forgave you for that and was honored to have you there.
Right. We went back there later on to see where I stood, and we took some pictures.
Sounds like quite a memory. Obviously, one of the main elements of your life and your career has been running this farm. It's been in your family's history for generations. And you told us a little while ago about your first experiences just coming back from the military, in fact, and working with your grandfather here, and working with your brother, your younger brother. Tell us a bit about running a farm. It seems like it's a 24-hour-a-day operation. There's no holidays. There's no vacations. It seems all-consuming. It seems like a very difficult and a very rewarding life with a lot of unique challenges to it.
Well, when we took over, we had horses, and neither my brother or I liked horses. But we had to use them until we got going. And we did get a tractor, and it was hard to get a tractor at those times because they were changing over from World War II, and the tractors weren't available. So finally we got a tractor, but in the meantime we had to use the horses, but they were very good sugaring up on the mountain, but mowing with a horses and so forth wasn't my idea of farming. And we had a hired man called Al Carnesian, who was a terrific guy. He was from, I should say Russia, but what are we fighting about over there now? He was very loyal to us, had worked for my family before, was a good horseman, and he knew that we were new in farming, and he was very patient with us, always worked, came on time, never cheated on his hours, was a very loyal person. If we needed help, when he wasn't supposed to be helping us, like it was going to rain or something, he'd get out there and help us. Great guy. And he lived to be in his 90s, and we were great friends. He didn't speak very good English, but I learned to understand him, and I could understand him better than his kids could, because I worked with him all the time. So that was our early experience after my father had died, and we took the job over, and we had a fairly good herd of cows. They did a good job with that, but we got brucellosis right after that. That's an abortion, and we lost the whole herd.
Oh.
And we know how we got it. A vet came in and spread it from a farm had been working at. He should have known better. So we were struggling to buy cows. We couldn't buy a whole herd. We had a chance to buy a whole herd, but we couldn't borrow the money. And it was a chance that somebody else took, I guess. And we had we went around looking for cows here and there, and Jim Warner was a person that was willing to help us because he was in the cattle business. And he was one of those great guys. He was very sympathetic and checked on us, you know. So we struggled, and we finally worked with a cattle dealer, a Jewish guy that did us a lot of favors. He would bring animals in, and we wouldn't pay for them, but he would take any culls that we had to help pay for it. So we were owing him money for a long time. He never said a word about owing. So he got us through the bad part, and then we began to improve the herd with some very good stock, and so they're doing very well right now. The go back to, we were still raising tobacco at that time, which helped us because that helped our income. But we had all that feed one year that we couldn't use. Well, we did store it, so it was all right. After that, we kept increasing our herd. And my brother got married in the meantime, and his marriage didn't work out. And he went to get a divorce in Greenfield. He went to courts in Greenfield and spent 2 days up there trying to get a divorce. And the judge was a Catholic, and he didn't want to give a divorce, so he didn't get a divorce here, so he left and went to not Reno, but another place out there, and got a divorce out there. He had to stay there for a while to establish a residence, and then he got a divorce and stayed out there and went to school out there and married his a Belden in the meantime, and he was going with her when she wasn't ready to get married. She was still in school, and they got married. It was a very successful marriage, and he went to San Luis Obispo to Cal Polytech and got a degree there. Came home and farmed in Hatfield. So that's was part of our experience in the beginning.
It seems, Jim, like there's so many different dimensions to operating a farm. You talked about managing the herd, but then a little while ago you mentioned sugaring up on the mountain, and you've talked about growing alfalfa and growing corn, and it seems like you've got a number of lands where you've got crops going, and so you've got the management of crops, and then you've got the management of the herd, and it seems like a farmer, a dairy farmer needs to be a bit of a jack of all trades. You need to be able to do lots of different things to support the operation.
That's true, and that's one of the good parts of my son. He can do a lot more than I ever could do. He's better, a good mechanic, a better mechanic than I ever was. But he had to be, because we use more machinery now than I used to have. We used to have one tractor and then 2 tractors. Now we have 5 tractors. And we have all kinds of machinery to harvest, to plant, and you're always fixing something. So that's part of the farming, and it's interesting. And I don't know how he has the patience. So some days there's 2 tractors down, and he needs one of them. So then you have flat tires and all the other things that go with it. So he needs another person right now, but he had me for a while. Well, of course, I still work, but I don't do as much as I used to. So he's wondering if he can't afford a full-time person.
Yeah.
And that's the trouble with farming today. You got to get bigger in order to make it easier and hire somebody.
Yeah. Well, that was actually one of my questions. As you well know, and I understand you were part of the regional compact, or maybe I'm using the wrong term, but the farming today, and really over probably the last couple decades, has been part of a national economic structure, and the giant farms of the Midwest are in many ways competing with your small farms here. How does that all work, and how do small farms survive in that kind of atmosphere?
Well, that's a good question, and I think that's the reason there's so few farms around here. You have to be pretty efficient to stay in business. Fortunately, we have a good co-op that we belong to. And I have been working with co-ops for 18 years. 3 different co-ops. First, it was NEMPA, which was a fairly good-sized co-op, with a place in West Springfield where they brought milk in. And when I got onto the NEMPA board, I said, I think we got to get bigger. And they got a little upset with me, so they made me a chairman of a committee to look into it. And we did some work to find out how farmers felt. And we decided to merge with other co-ops as much as we could. And the bank was very enthused about it. And I reported it back to the board, and they passed it, and so we became Yankee Milk. And Yankee Milk was pretty good size. We worked with Connecticut Milk and Northern Farms. And then Hood decided to sell out. And so we decided to buy Hood. We bought the factory and the facilities, and Agway bought the stock. We didn't work too well with Agway. I was on the committee, and I could see what was going on. And we finally decided that the Hood milk business wasn't making us any money, mainly because we were being underpriced. The other milk companies were selling milk cheaper, and so we were losing money. To keep up with them, and we had to spend a lot of money on the Hood plant anyway. So we decided to get out of it, and and form another committee, which I got onto. I was on the structure committee for Agrimark, and we worked on that for about a year, and the government was careful that we weren't becoming a monopoly, so we had to be careful what we did. So we formed that, and Agrimark's become very successful. I had a heart attack when we got through. I was in the hospital for 10 days.
Oh my gosh.
It turned out it was a very successful heart attack.
Well, isn't it interesting that not only did you have the farm that you were trying to operate and sort of manage at this level, but you were also providing your knowledge and your leadership and your contributions to the entire regional economy and to the growth of dairy farming in the region altogether. That's really quite generous. Seems like a family trait, and certainly one that you've had.
Well, it has been a very successful co-op. We bought out the cheese co-op in Vermont. I'm forgetting names.
Cabot.
Cabot. And that's been very successful, and they've expanded. And we own two cheese outfits in New York, and we've expanded out in New York, and we made a huge profit this year. So a lot of that profit went back to the farmers, and the rest of it went into more expansion. We're the only big co-op in the Northeast. Dairy Lee just joined a national milk co-op, and Dairy Lee used to be one of our competitions. And people in New York want to get back into Agrimark, but we can't take them in.
Because you get too big and it gets closer to that monopoly
We've
that you
got plenty
talked
of
about.
milk.
Wow.
And another thing that's so good about the co-op is that we have a plant in West Springfield. They make butter down there. They sell cream to what's the big ice cream?
Ben and Jerry's?
No, the one down here.
Friendlies?
Friendlies, yeah. And we're the balancing plant for all the other producers, because if they don't have enough milk, they can get it from us. If they have too much milk, we'll take it. We also make powdered milk. And if you don't have any other market, you put it into powder, and powder milk is doing very well. The milk business is doing very well right now because there's a shortage.
Unbelievable. And it sounds like you're still very involved in that, Jim. It's
my son is involved in it more than I am now.
Wow. But clearly you're very well attuned to exactly how it's going, and this is something you've nurtured for many years and still remain actively engaged in to this day, along with your son.
That's because it's so interesting.
Yeah.
That's why I like farming.
Yeah.
It's always something new.
Oh.
It's never dull.
And never a dull moment. And, it's wonderful that it's doing well now, but you've described a number of times when it was very dire, and you were on the edge of making it.
Yeah.
Aggie was always a very strong presence around the farm, and obviously was your important life partner from your days up at university in New Hampshire and all along. Tell us about her role in the farm and the community, and
I'll tell you a little bit about how I met her. I missed a ride to the University of New Hampshire because the fellow that I was going to ride with got the measles or something. And she was going to the University of New Hampshire, and I was going, and she saw me in Greenfield. She says, "Uh-oh, that guy's going to UNH. I'd like to meet him." That's what she told me. And she was with somebody that I knew pretty well, a guy. And so we met at North Station in Boston, and we missed the train to go to Durham, so we had to wait there, so we got acquainted. And I was pretty excited about that, and she didn't know it, but she was too, but she told me. But anyway, we rode up to, finally got on the train to New Hampshire and went up there, and she called me a few weeks later and asked me if I wanted to go to a dance with her. And I said, sure. And that's how we got going.
So she was ahead of her time. She was asking you to go out to a dance in a day where that would take a lot of courage on a woman's part to be that.
Well, she said a lot of the women went to school to get a man.
And she knew the man that she wanted.
Yeah. We found out we were born on the same day, too.
No kidding.
She said that was it.
Yeah.
I'd only been going with her for three or 4 months before I got into the service. And we got engaged before I went overseas.
And she waited patiently for you to come back.
Yeah, great person.
Yeah, you must miss her.
Yeah.
So, Jim, you and Aggie were engaged before you went into the service, and then how long after you got back before you officially tied the knot?
Well, right after I got back.
Right after you got back.
And I had to get discharged first, and they wanted to keep me in, and I had to struggle to get out because they were short. Everybody had gotten out. And finally, when I got out, right after that week, I had a wedding in October.
And you had now started working on the farm at that point for your with your grandfather and your dad.
Yep.
And then your family came along over the next few years,
Right.
and tell us all your kids.
First it was Laura in 1949, and then Jim in 1950, and Marcia in 1952, and Marilyn in 1954, and Bob in 1955. We were
Great.
busy.
You were busy with a lot of
And
young
she
ones.
was working on the farm too.
No kidding. Yeah. So taking care of 5 kids over the course of about 6 years, and wow, this must have been a pretty active place
It was.
at that
A
point.
lot of fun.
A lot of fun.
It
Yeah.
was amazing. I don't know how we did it. I
Yeah.
watch these young people today, and I don't know how they do it.
Oh, you know what? My kids are now 27, and I think the same thing. I see these families with young children, and I just see how big a challenge it is. And at the time, it seemed real easy and wonderful and rich.
You married very well.
I absolutely did. Now, every phase of your kid's life is it's a different kind of challenge, from when they're real youngsters, and then as they start growing up through teenhood, and even now, you must find that you enjoy being part of your children's lives as they're growing up, and you know, having kids, and in fact even grandkids of their own. You never lose that special relationship with your children.
No, I'm very, very lucky.
Yeah.
The kids
Yeah.
are so good,
Yeah.
and they're so appreciative.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Must have been a combination of your and Aggie's parenting that did that. You can be very proud.
Yeah, we were a good match, and she was the best you could get.
Yeah. Jim, I want to talk about one of the other legacies, along with the family you raise. One of the other real legacies for the Williams family is the role that you've played in protecting land in Sunderland. You were one of the first large landowners to get involved with the APR program and protect large areas of the town's agricultural landscape. Can you talk a little bit about that decision, because that must have been a tough choice for you?
Well, the amazing part is I got on the planning board, and the planner, you may want to take some of this out. The planner came up, the what do you call him? The professional planner came up with a plan for the town of Sunderland. And when he showed it to us, I said, "You've got everything in there, but you don't have anything about the farmland." He says, "You're right. I'll go back and do something about it." So he came back with the plan to transfer of development rights plan. And that sounded like a great idea. You could develop where and sell your development rights to a planner. To a builder. But it didn't go over very well, and so I said, "We got to do something about this." So I went to Farm Bureau in Franklin County Farm Bureau, and I said, "We need to do something about preserving land." And they agreed somewhat, but it was sort of lukewarm. And then I went to the State Farm Bureau, and they thought it was a good idea, and they came up with an APR program. So the APR program really started from here. And I don't know who the first person was to get into it, but we didn't get into it right away because we weren't going to sell our farm for development. So finally we did, but I don't know who the first one was in town that got into the program. It may be in the records somewhere.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
But the reason that I was so excited about what was happening to the land was the expansion of the university and what was happening to some of this great land, some of the best soil in the country. I had one piece that I had rented from the Skibiskis and we planted corn there, and they sold the building lots right next to the road, and the corn was over my head. They had to pay for the expense of the corn that they had to plow up, but they put in buildings there. It was rich soil, and I showed somebody from Yankee Milk this what was happening to our town, and I said we just have to keep selling, preserving the land. A lot of people didn't think it was so important, and they said because, you know, the development was helping them to sell land for a good amount of money. And some of the families that where the parents were there, but the parents had died, wanted some money right away, so they wanted to sell the development rights, and that was one of the reasons that we were losing, because they weren't interested in saving the farmland. So we finally got going in town, and it's been very good. I don't know who the first person was that sold their development rights.
It's amazing to learn, Jim, that you were instrumental in fact, in your advocacy for this idea. Going to Franklin County first, and then going to the state and advocating for some kind of a program that utilized those, created a market for those development rights. That is, I didn't realize that you helped spark that that entire idea.
Some of the farmers didn't like the idea because they wanted to keep their land, and wanted to sell their land in case they didn't want to farm anymore.
Right.
And we had a number of farms in town that weren't going to farm.
Yeah.
And the person that wanted to buy a farm couldn't pay the price of buying the farm, so they'd sell the development rights.
Well, you can see where, for many people, they would prefer to hold on to the value of the land and then just sell that off. You know, unlike your family, where there was another generation after generation adopted farming, but in another number of other families, the children moved away to, you know, this place or that. They didn't want the stress of the farming life, and in those cases, it was much easier for them just to be able to get the money back out. So you can appreciate where that was convenient, but what we sacrifice through that process is some of the best soils on the planet for farming. So for you, it was real clear that preserving the land was that was key. There was something special about these resources.
I think where my son was asked a question, we had a lot of people come to the farm to talk about the program and wondered why we did and so forth. My son was standing next to me, and after I got through talking a little bit, they asked my son, how do you feel about this? You won't be able to sell your land for development if you wanted to someday. And he said, someday it'll be worth more for farming than it will be for development. And we're getting there. We're almost there.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Because that was not always the case. And I think he's exactly right that the quality of this land, especially these lowlands down here, is so high for farming that it will surpass its development rights.
I agree with you. I read an article just the other day. It was written by the American Farmland Trust, I think. But they said that we're losing farmland every year, and they feel that if we keep going that way, there's going to be a real shortage of food in the world. We produce a lot of food for other countries.
Yeah.
We ship cheese overseas and powdered milk and other products, corn products. And So we have to think about it. We have too many people in this world.
Yeah. What is your hope for these lands 50 years from now, Jim?
Well, I think the dairy farmers are needed, for example, in this area because we keep the land in production. You can't raise potatoes on land for very long without depleting the soil. And we found that out because we have switched with potato farmers, and the soil isn't as good as the soil that we switched them with. But they need us because they can't keep raising potatoes all the time on the same land. So there's a real need for this soil around here. It's getting worse all the time for the potato farmers because they don't have anybody to switch with. They're coming to us and say, of course we have a lot of manure, and that's a great thing for the soil.
For replenishing those nutrients.
Yeah.
It sounds like farming is a real collaborative process where another farmer has a piece of land that they can't grow potatoes on this year, so they want you to grow a different crop on it while they grow potatoes on yours. It sounds like a real cooperative kind of relationship within the farming community. And is that true when in a place where it would seem like there'd be reason for competition? Isn't it interesting that it is more about collaboration?
It's very true, and I think it's a good thing because the farmers are beginning to like us and we like them. And we're working with them. They were our competition before because they could pay more for land.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't keep going that way.
Yeah.
So I think I'm optimistic.
Well, it seems that it's been part of your nature throughout your career and your life, Jim, that collaboration, whether it was working in the Agrimark kind of association of different farmers or the different efforts that you've made, it's always been about working to build partnerships and work together as opposed to work to be competitive with others. I think it's something special about your interests and your personality that help to do that.
Yes, and I think my son is pretty good at it.
That's great.
He works well with people.
Yeah.
I think he has more patience than I do.
Well, that's saying something. Then that is
I
that
keep
is
saying
true.
every day he's got so much patience.
That's great. Jim, when you look back on your legacy here for the town and your great grandkids, do you think they will or do understand the impact that you've had on the community in terms of the landscapes preserved, the richness that you and Aggie have brought to this town? And by that I don't mean monetary, I mean value.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. And they're very understanding.
Yeah.
And very nice families.
Yeah.
They make us feel so good.
I bet they do, and it's got to make you feel good to see a grandchild moving in directly across the street and working hard to build his home, his family's home there. And there's a lot of children and grandchildren who would just as soon get a long ways away from family, and yours are nesting right nearby. It's got to make you proud.
It does, and they are so willing to help. If the cows get out, they let us know.
Yeah.
And they help us get them in.
Yeah.
My grandson has a girlfriend. He hasn't married her yet, but he's going to get married. And they love animals, and his girlfriend loves animals. She's working with animals now, and she likes to chase cows. And they get out sometimes.
That's a handy trait. She's a keeper. Jim, it seems that in recent years we've seen a real explosion of kind of a more diversity of types of agriculture here in town. There's various, what do they call them, the community farms and co-ops, and just a range of different farm products that are available. Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen farming change here in the valley and what you think that might mean for the future?
The fact that they grow a lot of organic food is very appealing to the people around here, and they like to buy food right there that's grown right there. It's fresh, and they're doing very well. And some of them will grow food in greenhouses and sell them all through the year. I talked to one woman, and she said her husband wants to move to North Carolina, but she says, I want to stay here because of the food. She can buy fresh food anytime.
Yeah.
And it really is a great thing for the...
Yeah.
My daughter up on the hill buys food from all these different little places and gets acquainted with the people that farm there. So it's a big thing for the valley.
Yeah. Yeah. And is it mostly small farms that are doing that, or is that, again, kind of the big agribusiness?
I think most of the farms are small, and it's a good thing for us because we don't want them to be competing with the land that we want, because we're all okay anyway.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great thing to be using these small plots that the bigger farmers can't use.
Yeah. Jim, another point, we talked a little while ago about a particular landowner who will only rent her land to you. You must make a lot of relationships with landowners who appreciate the work that you do, and the way you steward their lands. Do you find you work with a lot of different people where you rent land from them? And
well, it works both ways. There are some owners that have small plots of land that don't want to rent to us because we use chemicals. They're organic people. They like organic. Then the farm we have in Montague, just across the line, is owned by a person that we have gotten along with very well. And Aggie used to bake bread for her, and I remember getting her. She wanted me to go ahead of her when she went home because it was foggy, which I did. But we became very close friends. So she wants us to use her land because she's very appreciative.
yeah,
And she's had organic people trying to... The organic people are really competing with us in a lot of our small pieces.
yeah,
And people that don't want to see chemicals used on farmland, especially different kinds of sprays that we have to spray with and so forth, they don't want us there.
So I could ask you about, guests who have been here on the farm that you've shown around and talked about preserving the land or dairying. You want me to ask that one?
Yes. John Boehner was working for Jane Swift when she was running for governor. And I was active in the Republican Party. Both of us were, as a matter of fact. Aggie was too. And he came with her, and I was quite impressed with him because he wanted to see the farm. He said, I don't know much about farming, which I learned from him. So he asked if he could see the dairy operation. We were over here. And so we went over and looked at the milking parlor and stuff, and it's very pleasant. Jane Swift didn't win that year, but I was hoping she would. I was quite impressed with her.
Now I hear you met Ted Kennedy at some point too. Is that was that here on the farm or elsewhere?
I was asked to speak over in the university farm over here, and I didn't know Ted Kennedy was one of the ones that was going to speak too. There were quite a few speakers on. I was the only farmer up there, and I sat down in a chair, and Ted Kennedy came and sat next to me, and I tried to carry on a conversation with him. I introduced myself, and he didn't say anything. I reached out to shake his hand, but he didn't shake my hand. So later on, he leaned over and he said, "I have to introduce this speaker." He says, "What do you know about him?" I didn't know anything about him. When I went to find out and found out about him and told him. So he had to introduce the speaker. So it was an interesting introduction. As soon as he got through speaking, he left, which I thought was kind of rude. He didn't hear me speak. But not that I cared. I'm a Republican. But he left, and a lot of people followed him, and it disturbed the rest of the speakers. So I thought that was kind of rude, but maybe he had another job to do.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah.
Could be. Any other stories you want us to sort of go back and?
Well, I've had a lot of interesting experiences. I have met former president Jimmy Carter. He and his wife. My wife and I both met him down at his hometown. I was very impressed with him as a person. Not as a governor, as a president. I think he was out of his class, and he didn't know what was going on in Washington.
And now, how did you happen to meet the former President Carter in his hometown down in Georgia?
We were on a tour. We took tours, country tours, and every once in a while they'd see a store or something, and they would stop at the store so all the women could go in and shop. And my wife didn't want to shop. She's not a shopper. So we sat there in the bus and we looked out the window, and there was Jimmy Carter and his wife. They were looking at a building that they were going to do a job on and fix it up. So we got out of the bus and went over to see what was going on, and he came over with his wife and shook our hands, and she did too, and he was very, very pleasant. I'm very impressed with the guy, but I just don't think he was a good president.
But it sounds like he was a very nice guy.
Yeah. think
Now,
it's still
I
is.
understand you've also met John Glenn. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Well, I was picked by, I don't know who in the state. They wanted farmers to attend the debate that they had at Dartmouth College. Eight Democrats were running for the nomination for president. And so I went up there with another friend of mine and my wife to Dartmouth, and we went into they gave speeches and asked for questions and so forth. And they were supposed to ask farmers questions too, I guess, but they didn't know who the farmers were because everybody was raising their hand. And that was an interesting thing because you had to be checked out before you went in there. When I came out, one of the persons that was doing the work, I can't think of his name, he was well known, and he was right behind me, and I said, "How come you didn't ask the farmers the question?" He said, "How did I know who you were?" He said, "You should have worn a straw hat." He's a very well-known guy on television. I can't think of his name. But we heard all the candidates, and I was very impressed with John Glenn. I thought he was the best one there. So we went to eat afterwards. We had to eat somewhere. We went to big inn at Dartmouth College where there's quite a big area for eating. And ate there, and John Glenn and his wife were eating right next door to us. And I went over and spoke to him. I said, John Glenn, I'd like to meet you. I was a Marine. He said, no, you are a Marine. And I asked him some questions on agriculture because I wanted to find out how various candidates felt, and he knew all the answers, prices and stuff. I was very impressed with him.
Wow.
And a very nice personality. He had been helping his wife through a problem she was having. I don't know whether it was a speech problem or some problem that she had, and she was all better. But his personality was great.
Mm.
He flew with Ted Williams, you know. He picked Ted Williams to fly with him in Korea because Ted was such a good flyer.
Wow.
But he was a great guy. Then the next guy that I talked to was Jesse Jackson.
No kidding.
And I asked him some questions about agriculture. He started to talk to me. I knew he didn't know what he was talking about. And he finally gave up and says, you better talk to my aide over here. He's a tall guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty good speaker, but not my type.
Didn't know much about farming.
We went to various fraternities after that to meet candidates and stuff. And my wife was walking with the guy that I went with, John Davis. She was walking with him ahead of us, and I was walking with John Davis's son. And we were going to go up these stairs. And as we started up the stairs, all these cameras were flashing at us, you know, they were taking pictures all over the place. They thought we were the candidate. I was the candidate. And we couldn't figure out what was going on.
That's funny.
I wish I could have got some of those pictures.
Well, Jim, this has been a true honor and pleasure for me to share this time with you. It is just a wonderful career you've had so far as you've raised a family here. You've been a Marine. You are a Marine. You are a farmer. And it is a true honor as a resident of Sunderland to go past on a daily basis the land that you've preserved and the landscape.
Thank you. You've been a good friend. You do a good job.